Good evening and welcome to the Performing Arts Center at Irvine Valley College. My name is Gary Reibold and I'm one of the debate coaches here at Irvine Valley. I'm especially proud to welcome the British Debate Team. We are the very first school that is on their tour. And in fact, after here, they're going to Virginia, then on to Chicago, into Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and they're going to end up at the National Convention in New Orleans sometime in mid-November. So we're the only West Coast school that they have, the first in the series, and we're also the only community college that the British are actually touring this year. We would like to thank several people for their participation in tonight. First, the National Communication Association, the large organization that all of the speech teachers belong to, are the main sponsors of the tour, along with the English-Speaking Union, which has been in London for some 70 years and sends trainers and teachers around the world to be able to teach debate, also hosting major programs and tournaments in the United Kingdom. Our association, students of Irvine Valley College are our sponsors tonight. We always thank them. They've always been very generous and strong supporters of the speech and debate team. I'd also like to thank our administrators. Our dean, Roger Owens, along with the president, Glenn Rockmore, have always been strong supporters of our international program. This is the 12th time that we've had an international team here. We've had teams from Romania, from the Czech Republic, from the People's Republic of China, and of course many teams from Great Britain, and it's just always a delight to have them here. Let me introduce the debaters for you. On our side, the Irvine Valley College debaters are first of all represented by our team captain, Ray Craig. And her partner for this evening will be Jake Glendenning. I had a chance to spend a little bit of time with British debaters. We're really happy we put them up in Laguna Beach. We know that everything on their tour will now be just a downhill part of what's going to be going on. Our first speaker from on the negative side tonight will be Richard Robinson from Manchester University. And his partner from Oxford is Ben Jasper. Between the two of our debaters, we have, 3 semesters of participation. Between the two of them, I believe they have 13 years, is that what we determined? So they started debating when they were in high school, and they're just about to become lawyers sometime in the spring here. So there's a proud tradition of debate in both of our countries, and we're happy to welcome them. The topic tonight will be that free societies should not block the free flow of information. Now, we're quite aware that there are many countries who routinely block the free flow of information. There are countries where you cannot get Facebook. When the Green Revolution was happening in Iran last year, Twitter was blocked. We know that during the Arab Spring that many of the dictatorships wanted to block the information from happening in a variety of ways. Now, unfortunately, there are many free societies, both of our countries, which are trying to do the same thing in many regards, either in regards to Facebook or cell phone or into Twitter. And we know that that is a subject that is so current that we wanted to have it as our debate. For our debate tonight, we will be having 6 speeches. Each debater will get what we call a constructive speech. We'll start with an affirming of the resolution, saying that we should not block the free flow, and then the negating side with the British team. Then we'll go to the second speaker from the affirming side, and then on to the second speaker on the negating side. After those 8 minutes are done, we will also then have 2 rebuttal speeches to summarize why they believe they're winning the debate, starting with the affirmative and then on to the negative. One thing that you'll have to know, I'll be sitting in the front row. I'll be keeping time. So if you hear me snap my hands like this, that means the 1-minute sign is being given, which they are now allowed to ask questions. They merely stand for a point of information. I'd ask both teams to use the microphone since we are taping the event tonight, right? And then if they want to accept the point, they can have the question asked. If not, they can politely sit them down until they want to receive a question. In the first minute, there's no questions. You'll hear me again. In the last minute, there are no questions. And during the 2 rebuttal speeches, they're just straight speeches without any kind of questions at all. All right, so without any more, then we'd now like to welcome the first affirmative speaker, please.
I'd like to start off today by thanking my amazing partner for showing up and debating with me. Everyone here who decided to spend a Monday night watching me and some British people argue, and the oh-so-sexy British for coming from all the way in the UK. All right, free society should not block the free flow of information. Now, before we have any sort of good argument, we must first define the words of the resolution. That way, we know what we're talking about. First, free societies will be defined as Western democracies. Second, block will mean to prevent. And the free flow of information will be the ability of your voice to be heard unabridged. Now, my partner and I will be arguing on the side that it is wrong and should never occur. We have 2 points to prove this. The first is that government blocks information in 3 ways. People to people, when the government uses the Patriot Act to read your emails and decide whether or not you can send them. Government not telling things to the people, like Bush's weapons of mass destruction. And when the government filters what it tells you. This is usually how we get ourselves into war. Now, our first point is that free societies, we need to have the free flow of information. Our first point is that free societies need to have the free flow of information. Yeah, Ben?
If WikiLeaks had known that the US was about to launch the attack that killed Osama bin Laden, do you think the US government should have blocked them broadcasting that information if they'd had it?
Well, first of all, we can't deal with ifs and what would have happened, since that's not what actually did happen. WikiLeaks didn't have that information. And I'm pretty sure Osama bin Laden was under constant vigilance, just like Mad Eye Moody, thinking that we were coming at him at any time. Now, for several reasons, the first being that when we have the free flow of information, we have better educated citizens. Our first point is that as a free society, we need the free flow of information for several reasons. The first being that the free flow of information, we have better educated citizens. And in a free society, the people are the policymakers because everyone has the right to vote. With the free flow of information, these better educated citizens make better decisions that lead to better policy and better society overall. The second reason is that the media acts as a watchdog on the government. The British might not get this because Rupert Murdoch runs their media. The second reason is that the media acts as a watchdog on the government. Now, if a politician screws up, you hear about it in the news. This keeps our politicians in check and keeps them doing what's in the best interests of the citizens, well, the citizens in their demographic. Without the free flow of information, we would not have the watchdog press that we have today. The final reason is that it improves safety. With the free flow of information, people are now able to send warnings right away, like when my mom has her time of the month and I send my dad a text. Yeah, your point?
So if the cost of, saving people's lives by shutting down Facebook for a few hours is me not being able to check my girlfriend, update her status about her lunch, do you think that's a worthwhile cost to pay?
That all depends on the circumstances. I would argue that it is never appropriate for society to shut down the free flow of information. That's kind of the point of this debate. I mean, it's more than just checking your Facebook status. It's being able to have information. What if your girlfriend was in harm's way and the only way she could tell you was a quick little Twitter, because my phone can do that and most smartphones can too. A lot of times we need this as a safety concern. Like, when we had the recent blackouts and earthquakes, it wasn't the news that informed most of us that this had happened. It was everyone updating their Facebook status that they didn't have power or that the ground was shaking beneath them. Medic Mobile is doctors via text message that are now able to help their patients no matter how far away they are. So senior citizens in Utah can be in constant contact with their doctors even if they're on vacation in Hawaii playing golf. With the free flow of information, without the free flow of information, it would take much longer to warn people, like if your girlfriend was stuck in a riot. Those are just a few of the reasons why the free flow of information is good. It creates well-informed citizens, it allows the media to have checks and balances on the government, and acts as an early warning system. Our second main point is why blocking the free flow of information is wrong. Our first reason why it's bad is blocking the free flow of information denies people their basic rights. our first reason why it's bad is because blocking the free flow of information denies people their basic rights. Up in San Francisco, the government blocked cell towers for hours to stop peaceful protesters. So people who didn't even know about the protest lost their right to communicate, along with people who were denied their right to have a peaceful protest. Now think of all the 13-year-old girls who couldn't go on Facebook. The second reason why it's bad is because it leads to more harm and bloodshed. The second reason why it's bad is because it leads to more harm and bloodshed. Just look at the Pentagon Papers from Vietnam. If the public knew what we were really doing over there, the war would have ended much sooner. The papers include the fact that the Beatles were right and we were the ones causing the war. We were the ones inflaming the issue and instigating the war, just like when my little brother on long car rides when he's, not touching me. Maybe even the 4 students at Kent State might not have lost their lives during their peaceful protest if the entire society had known about the Pentagon Papers. The third reason why it's bad is because it leads to a police state. The third reason why it's bad is because it leads to a police state. Just think of V for Vendetta, A Clockwork Orange, 1984. You know, all those fictional British police states? No wonder the British want one. When a society blocks the free flow of information, that society is no longer free. When society blocks the free flow of information, that society is no longer a free society. If it wasn't for Tom and Paine's common sense and Benjamin Franklin, we would still be British too. Too soon? One of the things that gives us the liberty to be free is the fact that we have the right to communicate freely. This is in our First Amendment. We need the free flow of information because it allows people to have their basic rights. It prevents further bloodshed, and without it, we will never know what Kim Kardashian had for dinner, and we'd be in a police state. These 2 points, that we need the free flow of information, that it's good to have, and the second, that it's wrong to block the free flow of information, is the main reasons why you should be voting for the government side today, why free societies should not, ought not, and never be allowed to block the free flow of information. As a free society, we need the free flow of information to exist in order to function as a free society. So as long as you want your liberty, you need the free flow of information. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It is an enormous pleasure to be here in Laguna Beach, and I genuinely mean that. In my country, it rains on average every 2 days, so being at Laguna Beach is, let me say, cool. It's pretty awesome. Thankfully, Piers Morgan has successfully squashed the myth that all British guys are charming. I'll do away with the pretenses. Similarly, Kate Middleton has kind of ruined the idea that we have a good dress sense, so we get away with the creases and all that in our suits from the traveling. So I'm going to do away with the pretenses and simply get down to business. You know, in a world where information was never harmful, where news stories or tweets or Facebook updates could never hurt anybody or were never used to coordinate terror attacks, or even less severely, people didn't wish to commit vicious hate crimes against minorities or just do things that are deeply problematic for people's property or to their personhood. We'd probably like free information to flow, but I know we're in the home of the Anaheim Angels, but unfortunately it doesn't mean we live in a dream world. And that means that information has to be limited in certain circumstances. And it's precisely on that basis that we believe it is permissible for the state to, in certain circumstances, limit public information in the public domain. Now, we don't believe that we should support intrusions to the degree of, for example, the Patriots Act, where government can read your emails. That's not the contention that we aim to defend on this side of the House. No, thank you. What we do hope to defend, however, is we hope to suggest that, that where information is in the public domain, be it through social networking sites or otherwise, that represents an imminent threat or the risk of an imminent threat to people or to their property, whether it's through the coordination of flash mobs in Colorado or whether it's through the ignoble desire to commit civil disorder like we saw in London during the rioting, we believe it's legitimate for the state to shut them down using necessary means. For example, we would, shut down Facebook, we would shut down Twitter if it was necessary. Similarly, we believe it's acceptable to shut down television sites from Fox News, and even newspapers like the Washington Post will have embargoes on particular stories and from releasing information that we consider is problematic to the safety of our people. And if they choose to print those stories anyway, they'll be punished accordingly. And similarly, if we have to, we'll commit denial of service attacks against prominent websites like WikiLeaks that aim to disrupt the civil society that we live in, no thank you, and by releasing information that is problematic to it. And we don't think there's a problem with that. I'm going to explain why in a few ways. It's really simple. I'm going to explain the problem that exists when you don't and you give some kind of strange immunity to internet websites and to information that flows through as news. And I'm going to explain why that's problematic. I'm going to explain that in two ways. Firstly, about how the police currently don't have the means to deal with this kind of information flowing, and why this recent liberalization of social media means that it is increasingly more difficult for the police to police it doesn't make sense, for the police to deal with such a threat. Finally, I'm going to explain why the kind of policy that we suggest, why denial of service attacks, etc., are the most reasonable and plausible means, and why the incursion on our liberties is minimal in that respect. Firstly, some rebuttal. She told us that we need information to be free in order to better educate our citizens. And we broadly speaking agree with that. That's why we don't limit all information. That's why we don't live in, for example, some kind of repressive regime where what people read is determined by the state. But what we do think is that information could come with context. And we think that similarly, not all information, no thank you, is good information. And so we should have some kind of conduct in respect to which we allow certain information to be blocked, like official secrets, for example, and the point of information that Ben brings you, where we identified a particular piece of information that might have been problematic to dispose. Notice that she didn't really want to engage with that hypothetical example. I would contend it's because it was deeply problematic for their side of the house. Secondly, they told us that it's also important because it keeps politicians in check. We actually think it makes us hold politicians to an unnaturally high standard, and in doing so isn't particularly helpful. But moreover, that information comes in a non-contextualized way, right? So we can often interpret information without the context that comes with that information that makes it necessary to be used as part of some kind of rational judgment process, and that's problematic too. Then she told us about emergency situations where senior citizens in Utah won't be able to phone their parents, phone their children, for example. Well, we don't think those instances are don't think they happen very often, and even when they do, we think the harm that accrues is minimal. And she told us that the First Amendment makes us free. It's important that we have the free flow of information in order to justify our claims that we live in the land of the free. We would claim that that simply isn't true. Living in a democratic society, a system where people co-opt together for mutual advantage, makes us free. And when people threaten that, we always limit their freedoms. That's what prison is. It is a limitation upon one's freedom because they attempt to limit somebody else's. So rights are the whole of morality, and I'll take you in a second on this. And in doing so, whenever someone threatens to break the system or disrupt the system that we live in that grants us our freedoms, it is perfectly legitimate and permissible, and indeed obligatory, for the state to protect them, even if that means incurring on their freedoms. I'll take you now. Yep.
My question is, can I have a bright line for when it is and is not appropriate? Like, is it $100 worth of damage or a life cost? What is, in fact, the bright line for when the government can infringe my rights?
Well, broadly speaking, we think the decision is one that should be left to the determination of people like judges who make these kinds of balancing acts on a regular basis. But if you wanted a bright line, I would say where the threat exceeds, like for example, where the threat is disproportionate, where the claim that you are making is not greater than the damage you're likely to cause. If you're likely to cause hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of public damage, or the damage to lives lost, or we're talking about, for example, the position of troops, we think it's deeply problematic to allow that information to be released, and it's pretty easy to make those determinations. So, why is it difficult under the status quo for police to deal with this kind of information? Recognise that the rise of social media and the prominence of major news outlets presents two threats. Firstly, in shaping public opinion in potentially damaging ways. But secondly, it allows people to consequently mobilise at an astronomical speed organisations whose purpose is often to damage and disrupt social order. Look, for example, at flash mobs in Colorado, etc. All of the evidence demonstrates that social media allows these people to organise at incredible speeds with people with similar grievances inconsistencies across particular locales. That presents two problems for conventional police tactics. Firstly, on a three problems. Firstly, on a strategic level, given the size of the groups that are now able to mobilize, it means that police are often outnumbered and their lives are at risk when they go to defend property or people who are likely to be damaged by the protest in particular. That is incredibly problematic, not least because we think one of the main purposes of the state is to not only protect its citizens, but protect those people who enforce our laws. Secondly, the police don't have the resources to monitor every tweet or every Facebook update, status update, because they're so vast and increasingly more vast. As more people sign up to these kinds of organizations, those things become even more difficult to regulate. Thirdly on this, even if we did have the resources to monitor them, there's simply no system by which we can evaluate the credible from the non-credible threats, right? And even if you could kind of come up with that system, we think it's incredibly labor-intensive and capital-intensive, such that it wouldn't be worth the cost when you have an alternative that damages us so minimally. Not being able to see what my girlfriend eats for lunch, for example, is such a small incursion of my liberty. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's not really expressive of my identity, right? It's not burning a flag. It's not expression in the sense that that the forefathers sought to defend. It doesn't express anything about me that's particularly important, specifically not when we shut down the website for 2 minuscule hours. And when you consider the damage that's caused to property or to people, or even to the credibility within the police force, we think that to defend freedom of expression through the mechanism of social media, just because it's expression, is frankly, we think quite self-indulgent. So for that reason, we beg to oppose.
On July 4th, 2011, Bay Area Rapid Transit officers shot a homeless man that they claimed was brandishing a weapon. The investigation for this is still ongoing. On New Year's Day, 2009, however, they killed a man in Oakland who was unarmed but causing a disturbance. In reaction to this, the citizens of San Francisco attempted to stage a peaceful protest on August 11th, 2011, and they were to organize this using Twitter. That protest never happened. This is because the city of San Francisco took the extraordinary step of shutting down cell phone service for several hours, affecting the protesters as well as the residents of San Francisco. Now, I'm not trying to put the police on trial here. They have a hard, often thankless job as it is, but at the same time, American citizens have the right, the freedom to protest peacefully against government action. Shutting down cell phone towers to deny people the right to assemble is not an action of a free society. It is that of a police state. And that is why we as the government feel that the United States, nor any free society, should block the free flow of information, because we do not want to be limited to police states, and we'd much rather have this freedom that the forefathers gave us a long time ago. So, to move on to what my partner was saying earlier and their addresses to this. Their first point went to my partner saying that the reason for media acts as a watchdog press, and that the watchdog press then makes a check, if you will, on the government, and that this is a good thing. However, they said that official secrets we should block, but when asked to produce a bright line, they simply just passed the buck on to the government officials and said it would probably be better if they handled it. However, we don't know exactly where that buck stops. We don't know if we should stop it at some flash mobs that destroy a little bit of property, or flash mobs or potential harmful items that we don't know what could happen exactly. See, if we stop it at destroying a few tables in a public place, then that is limiting society to that of a police state. And the main argument here is that this is a very slippery slope we can fall on. And we don't know how soon or how we should stop this if we start falling upon that. So we believe that the way things are right now is how it should be, and that the limitations for this should never be enacted. On to my partner's point, where she said that it keeps politicians in check and keeps them doing what is in the best interest of the citizens. They said that the information is They went on to say that the information goes without context. And this is a problem because it causes wrongful shutdowns at times. As I said before, we do not know where to stop with this. And under my partner's second point, the second subpoint in the major subpoint of free flow being a good thing, my partner went on to say that, that shutting down, or not shutting down, and keeping the information free improves safety. We then gave warrants to this, such as the mobile medic program, where it saves lives. We proved through this that it actually saved lives. There is no potential here, but we proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have the potential to save lives through free flow of information. At the end of this, please. And if we blocked that, then that would deny people the opportunity to save lives and take away this opportunity of the people's right to life, but also free speech. I can take your point now.
But if there's a really credible, clear threat that terrorists are about to launch an attack on a particular city, and we, for instance, shut down mobile phone networks in that region and stop them being able to launch that transmission signal or communicate with each other, don't we save so many more lives than that one person who might fall ill on the subway?
That's a good question, and I have two responses to this. The first response to this is going to be, has that happened before? We have no reported instances of that ever happening, nor those means ever being effective toward that. Second of all, terrorist organizations also often have different variations and different backup plans. They wouldn't be communicating via Twitter or simply texting each other. They would have other means of doing this. And without an actual empirical evidence from the past, then we don't know how we'd respond to this or if this would work whatsoever. But we do know that people are smarter than that, and that generally people will find ways around that, just as we find ways to talk to our friends when our internet is out or something of that nature. Now, at the end of this, please. Now, to move on to my partner's second main point, that it was that blocking the free flow of information is wrong and bad. Unfortunately, this point went completely uncontested, and the opposition were as silent as a British Royal Guard. Pardon the pun. But all they actually responded to was that the free flow of information is a good thing. They never said why blocking is a bad thing, and they seemed kind of dodgy whenever we tried to bring it up in a point of information. On top of that, in their top of case, in their constructive speech, their first one, they said that they should be limiting it and not blocking it, which isn't exactly what the resolution calls for. I can take your point now.
When WikiLeaks, for example, released thousands of diplomatic cables causing irreparable damage in relations with the US and all foreign embassies, do you think that it might have been useful if we could have blocked that information?
Regarding WikiLeaks, there is no actual reported death or anything of that sort with WikiLeaks, nor is there any empirical evidence that there was any harm done whatsoever. WikiLeaks was an example of something that could have gone horribly wrong, but action other than blocking the free flow of information was able to stop it, which proves that we have healthy alternatives to this that don't harm people and that don't abridge rights. So should we not just turn to those instead of just taking the easy way out and blocking it and becoming a police state of our own? I say no, we shouldn't become a police state. Now, regarding what they said off of the case, not in regards to what my partner said whatsoever, they said under their two problems that A, the police currently don't have the means, and B, the denial to this is most reasonable and plausible. To which I would respond, and then they went on with an example of flash mobs, in which if a flash mob happened, like the ones that were destroying some property in Colorado, I believe, then the police would not be able to deal with this. However, this was able to be stopped rather quickly, and there was no harm to anybody in particular. The police were able to get a handle on this scenario, and things were better overall because we didn't block the free flow of information. Whereas we saw rights abridged in San Francisco, we saw a similar scenario, similar harms, one of which involved abridging rights, taking rights away from people, and the other of which involved police doing their job and doing exactly what it is they're paid for. I prefer the police actually doing what they're there for and not taking rights away from people. And that's what this debate really comes down to, inalienable rights that are given to everyone within a free society. Now, their second response to this was not enough resources, to which I'd like to report that there was no harm done to anybody, and the property harm was minimal to the flash mobs in Colorado, and law enforcement was able to step up and solve for these problems. And then they went on to say that denial is the most reasonable and plausible alternative to shutting it down, to which I simply agree, because taking away rights are simply not worth it. And for all of the above reasons, I'd like to urge a government ballot from all of you today. Please vote with government, or with the government. Thank you.
Hello everyone, it's a real pleasure to be here in California. We've had like a really brilliant time so far, and we just want to extend a really massive thank you to Gary and Ray and Jake for hosting us and for making us feel so welcome. But more importantly, we're delighted to be in California more generally. Not only is it hot, the food's good, people are also really, really attractive on the whole, which is a welcome change from the UK where it's generally pretty cold, the food is pretty bad, and we have a rather unattractive and inbred royal family. So, oh dear, there goes that future knighthood in 50 years' time. Not that was ever coming in the first place. I'd like to talk to you about three major things today. I'm going to try and show you why the free flow of information, when it's never blocked, when there are no circumstances in which it should ever, ever, ever be blocked, which is what they're defending, it does three massive things. It makes it harder for us to ever win wars, ever again. It makes it much easier for our enemies to defeat us. And thirdly, and most importantly, it changes the nature of attacks that take place against us all the time. And I'm going to try and show you that on those three grounds, just sometimes being able to block information is actually the right solution, and that's why you should vote for the opposition side today. There are a few things that I want to talk about firstly. So we've had a really fantastic and very compelling example from the last speaker, Jake, about this tremendous abuse of police power in San Francisco and the way in which popular protest was limited as a result of this situation. We say that was an abuse of power. People shouldn't be stopped from peacefully protesting. But the examples we gave were not about shutting down things in response to peaceful protests. It was about credible bomb threats. It was about suicide attacks that were imminent and well evidenced. It was about, as happened in London over the past summer, people coordinating riots, smashing up, causing hundreds of millions of pounds worth of damage via Facebook and via Twitter. They're the kind of examples that we're talking about. And no, they're not everyday examples, but they are happening increasingly, and they are the kinds of situations in which we think this solution has some kind of impact. Remember, they think we should never, ever deny that free flow of information. Secondly, we had this issue about Osama bin Laden, and everyone likes to talk about Osama in that sense. So there were two things they said. They firstly said we shouldn't talk about hypotheticals. If WikiLeaks had known, who cares? It didn't happen. But that's not really the attitude that governments should take. They have to think about those questions of if. What if they did have that information? And media organisations are so resourceful that they sometimes do have that information. Then we were told, secondly, well, Osama was always paranoid. He was always going to be there worrying about US forces storming in. Yeah, but there's a difference, isn't there, between a vague paranoia, a vague suspicion, and knowing that night that they were coming for you. There's a difference between Osama being dazed and confused and in his pajamas, and Osama being ready with guns for those forces, and possibly leading to the deaths of troops, and maybe him running away and not being caught. So they're very real consequences from these kinds of situations. So we really beg you to think about that when you're considering the vote. Then they said, well, if we shut down cell phones, they'll find other ways to communicate. Well, what are those other ways? Do they have telepathy? Do they magically kind of commune with the dead to kind of work out where they're going to happen? Even if they can find other means, it is a removal of one means of communication. It makes it just that little bit harder to coordinate that attack. It makes it harder for those mobile phone signals, as were sent in Madrid in the Madrid train bombings in 2005, to be sent to those trains. And I'll take you in a minute on this point. Finally, though, they said there were no reported deaths from WikiLeaks. And more broadly, that basically free-flowing information doesn't lead to deaths. Well, I'd like to hear a response about those CIA assets that were revealed by WikiLeaks, those people who are almost certainly dead in Iraq as a result of their identities being revealed because WikiLeaks didn't redact that information. I'd like to know not just about the deaths, but about the fact that the leader of the Palestinian Authority has no credibility amongst many Palestinians because his whole negotiating position was revealed by WikiLeaks. So people have died. People's political positions have been completely destroyed. And as in London, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of damage was done because we didn't stop that information. What are you going to do about that?
Would you like to take my point or have me answer yours?
Oh, whichever you prefer.
to your point. As on the topic of WikiLeaks, the CIA agents that were reported are now listed as missing in action, which is simply a tactic that the CIA uses. They've actually said that no life has been lost, including the CIA agents that were in the Middle East at the time. We actually have an infrastructure set up called the Witness Protection Program for this thing.
But WikiLeaks would say that, and I mean, there are resources that have been killed as a result of this thing. There are people who have died, so you just have to believe me and just believe that I'm telling the truth. I'm very truthful. So on to the sort of main constructive material. I'm going to tell you a very brief story about the First World War. There was a regiment in Britain called the Hertfordshire Hearts, and there were reports that this entire regiment was wiped out. They were killed on the fields of the Somme. And the reports said they died valiantly charging into the lines of German guns, and they were heroes and they were brave. The truth was that they were mowed down mercilessly whilst running away from the ongoing advancement. But the boost in terms of morale that was told when the governments lied about that information, when it didn't release that information, was dramatic. And I don't think we're trying to justify governments lying here. We're just trying to say that where there are horrendous things that happen in wars, where there are pieces of information that shouldn't be given out, that can have a tremendous boost to morale to everyone else. And there are some situations where governments should restrict the kind of information, or should restrict the information that other people give out. So if we do allow this free flow of information, we don't let people block it at all, it makes it firstly much harder to win wars. If we see on our screens every single day the horrendous bloody brutality of war, it means that in justified situations, I don't want to have a debate about whether or not certain wars are justified, but where there are justified wars, it means that people are much less likely to have support for them. They're going to lobby their congressman or their senator to stop those particular wars. And it means that as a result of that, we're much less likely to be able to intervene in really important humanitarian circumstances. Secondly, the media often only pick the most extreme examples of things that happen. They only pick the things that happen when our troops get killed, or when there are horrendous atrocities, and they're far less likely to pick up the situations where troops have done a really brilliant job, or they've helped families in particular countries. It's because of that one-sided nature that we can't just trust the free flow of information, and that sometimes the government stepping in and stopping the release of that can get a much better and more balanced picture. Secondly, though, we say that it massively helps our enemies. Because when we release some of this information and we allow it to get out and we don't block it, it holds a huge rallying cry for radical extremists who can say, look what they do, look at the kinds of things they can do. They can cut videos, they can make it seem like we are sort of fundamentally evil. So we think that when we can block some of those more extreme abuses, it means that people are less likely to join these radical groups in those other parts of the world. And this doesn't just have a consequence for us in the UK or the US. It has a massive consequence for us to be able to go to war justifiably. Look at the impact that the deaths of American troops in Somalia had in the early 1990s when it was publicized all over the media and there was no attempt to block that information. It meant that when 600,000 people were killed in Rwanda just a few years later, there was almost no way that the US government could get any credibility to intervene. The very final thing to say is it changes the nature of the attacks against us. Because terrorists know that they can go for big, high-impact targets. For instance, in Mumbai, they're much more likely to firstly attack once and have a much delayed attack just 20 or 30 minutes later to make sure that the TV crews are there to pick it up. In some situations, we should block the broadcast of these things. We shouldn't show videos, we shouldn't reveal secrets, we certainly shouldn't have the free flow of information in every situation. Apologies for taking too long. Thank you very much. We beg to oppose.
All right, the first thing I'd like to do is once again thank my partner for being awesome, the sexy, sexy British for coming all the way from the UK, and everyone in the audience. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to refute what he said in his last speech, and then I'm going to give you two main points as to why you'll be voting for IVC today. We're not quite Long Beach. All right. He says that it's harder to win wars, and what I have to say about this is, no, it's not. With full disclosure, we're not talking about full military disclosure. Just like you have the right to be heard, you have the right not to speak. That's in your Miranda rights. So we're only talking about governments blocking the free flow of information. We're not dictating the governments should be talking. Next, he says that it's easier for your enemies. And what I have to say about that is these people, our enemies, are going to go with what they think is their best advantage, regardless of what information they have. Now, if you were to look at their examples, and then I'll give you one of my own, and that is D-Day, when we stormed the beach of Normandy. It's not called D-Day because of devastation or destruction. It's because there was an A-Day, a B-Day, a C-Day, a D-Day, an E-Day, and an F-Day, and it just happened to be what day we landed on the beach, because Normandy knew we were coming. Next, he says that it changes the nature of the acts. And what I have to say about that is terrorists were bombing high-profile attacks before this even became an issue. The Twin Towers was before this even happened. So they were doing this before the blockage of the free flow of information. Therefore, it's non-unique to societies overstepping their bounds and infringing on our rights as not just citizens, but human beings. He says that governments ought to prevent credible threats. And when I asked what was a credible threat, he said that it's the government that gets the right to decide. When you let the government decide what is and is not a credible threat, you get an instance like in the BART, where they're shutting down peaceful protests because there might be some harm to it. That's not a credible threat. That's a society that lives in fear, walking on eggshells, where the citizens have no rights, where everyone is peaceful and everyone is mundane. Next, he said of the UK riots, that he said that they were very paranoid, and he gave the example of the UK riots about how people in London went for a riot. And what I have to say about that is Canada recently rioted when they lost a hockey game. And the very next day, those people that rioted used social networking to, once again, get up, collect themselves, and instead of rioting, they cleaned up their mess. So it all depends on what your society does with the riots. Canada had a let's clean up the mess riot. So it all depends on the society that's rioting. Next, he says that how else are they going to get together? Do they have telepathy? And for that I say, look at 1990 in Czechoslovakia, where their Prague protest was actually brought together by a rock and roll song by the Plastic People of the Universe that gave the date, time, and location. So when all else fails, rock and roll. And he gave the example of in London when their government flat out lied to their people, where they lost a battle. They mercilessly lost a battle, were mauled down while running away, and the government said that it was a good thing, that they died heroes. The government was flat out lying to its people to boost morale. I don't think it is at any point in time my government's right to lie to me. When governments start lying to their people, that government has no credibility, and you can no longer trust anything that government says, because what is it lying about today? Today it's lying about who won and who lost a battle. What's it lying about tomorrow? This is just a recipe for Soviet Russia. I can't read that. Sorry, his penmanship isn't the best. Next, on to the two main points while you'll be voting for the government team from IVC, me and my partner Jake, saying that free societies should not ever block the free flow of information, the first being San Francisco. The government shutdown information is never allowed because it hurts your rights. Just look at the BART up north. The government shut down a peaceful protest because a police officer shot and killed 2 men. The society blocked the free flow of information. That's no longer a free society because they're using this right, that they've manifested to prevent peaceful protests against the government. The second reason why you'll be voting for the government side from IVC is who gets to decide. The society the British team argues for is one where citizens have no liberty and live in constant fear. And for all those reasons, you'll be voting for us.
I'm literally flabbergasted with the robustness with which the government team stands by its outrageous claims today. It claims that there are, even notwithstanding the strength of the argumentation we bring you, there are never circumstances where it might be deeply harmful to allow people to express themselves. They tell us that information is good, irrespective of its consequences. They cling to some abstract moral right with which expression supersedes all damage that might be caused, be it physical or emotional. That, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, is nonsense. And we bring you concrete examples of where people and their lives are at risk because of the information that could be released, and we believe it is the responsibility of the government in those circumstances to do things that we might cringe at morally in typical circumstances. But when you are responsible for an entire population, we think it might be okay for you to lie to people in order to give your troops some support and morale. We think it might be okay for you to block information so people don't get to say racist or abusive or harassing things on social networking websites. We think it might be useful for you to prevent mobile phone technology when they might be used to commit and perpetrate terrorist attacks on your own country. I think it'd be ridiculous and frankly rather self-indulgent to cling to some moral claim that self-expression is so important in those circumstances, and that is what we told you throughout the debate today. They tell us, well, social networking websites and free information can be used for good. I mean, look at the Canadians. After they smashed up their entire town, they used it to, clean things. Well, had we just blocked the information and blocked the social networking sites from allowing them to mobilize, you wouldn't have had to clean it up in the first place. Moreover, you can, block it for the bad things, and then at the end, when the aftermath is important, you can still, you don't permanently block Facebook. It would still be acceptable for people to mobilize for noble purposes. We are just saying that in instances where people are using it to do and commit acts of damage to property and to people, it would be entirely ridiculous to allow them to do so. So I simply don't understand where they go with that. And then they tell us that, well, at the end of the day, at the point at which governments are free to lie to us, we basically live in Soviet Russia. I mean, that's obviously not true for like 7 reasons. I'll stick with 2. Firstly, because, there's no government in the world that has never lied to its people, and surprise, surprise, it's not Soviet Russia. Moreover, people still have other rights, right? And rights, let's remember, and this is really important, there are no rights that exist in society today, that exist in the abstract, that supersede all other rights, that don't hurt or infringe other people's rights. When someone is entitled to express themselves in an unlimited way, which incidentally, no country in the world permits, right? You might be free to express yourself and free to reveal information, but you aren't, for example, allowed to just say whatever you like that might be racist, or tell people to attack certain people in certain instances. And that's a very important reason, because your right to express yourself at the point at which it damages somebody else's right to, live free of intimidation and harassment and being persecuted for reasons that you are not in control of, at that point your right becomes slightly unimportant. Indeed, it is the responsibility of the government to protect the social system of cooperation that allows us all to have rights. And it is unacceptable for the government team to simply ignore what Ben told you in that respect, because there are specific contexts where not blocking information can be deeply problematic. What are they? Firstly, we told you it becomes incredibly difficult to prosecute wars. Why is that? Well, we gave you 4 reasons, and they were never engaged with particularly competently, but let me just go over a few that were really important. We told you, most importantly, that there is a specific loss of political will that we see exhibited in the West when they see their soldiers killed. It becomes a tactic that terrorist cells use in order to actually destabilize and stop Western governments from committing and going into countries where there might be a humanitarian need. We told you that the example of this is Mogadishu, and there are thousands more. Well, for example, the American soldiers that are hung from bridges in Fallujah, they are all tactics deployed to break your spirit and stop you from wanting to prosecute that war. When you see those horrific images, it has an extraordinary effect on us and prevents us wanting to do that. That's why in Rwanda, no Western government was prepared to stop the deaths and the massacre of thousands of people. That is an incredibly harmful consequence of what stands as an incredibly problematic resolution, and it's one that they simply never dealt with. They chose to tell us that they wouldn't engage in hypotheticals. But the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, not blocking information is the specific consequence of things like that, of people dying and of people being harassed or being damaged or property being damaged like you saw in the London riots. And we consistently gave you examples of that damage, and they never, ever wanted to engage with it. Their final response was that it leads to a police state. There is an inevitable slide whereby people can't decide. Ladies and gentlemen, judges in your country are the arbiter of every single right you have under the Constitution. Notice that they balance them all the time. Roe versus Wade is a seminal case of balancing the right to life with the right to choose? Why is it not plausible that they can similarly balance the right to freedom of expression against the right to not be intimidated, or indeed killed, or indeed harmed? For those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, it's only really coherent for you to oppose. Thank you very much.
Once again, we'd like to thank the British team for coming to Irvine Valley College. At this time in the debate, we usually take a floor vote. So if you are going to vote for Irvine Valley College, would you please stand right now? Please stand. Okay, please sit down now if you would like to vote for the Brits. Oh, I'd say it's a tie, wouldn't you? No. Yeah, very close. I think a slight edge for the British team. So, congratulations. Once again, I would like to thank our fine coaching staff. We have 10 coaches this year, so if you enjoyed what you saw, we're still recruiting. We'd love to have some new members on the team. We meet on Wednesday afternoons, Friday afternoons. Contact the other co-director, Edmund Tiongson, or myself. We'd love to have some more students. Thank you again for coming this evening.